They called him unfixable. A wild bobcat born behind metal bars, angry, untamed, and unpredictable. Every cage it ever been in had only made him more broken. By the time he reached the rescue center, the decision had already been made. He was too aggressive, too wild to ever live peacefully among humans. In just a few days, he would be put down. But fate has a strange way of sending the right person at the right time. When Sarah Bunnet walked through those shelter doors, she didn't see a monster behind the cage. She saw fear. She saw pain. And she saw a life worth saving, even if the whole world had already given up on him. What followed was a fight not against claws or teeth, but against hopelessness itself. The rescue center was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself knows what's about to happen. Rows of cages lined the narrow hallway, each holding an animal waiting for a second chance. But at the far end, behind reinforced steel bars, was the one no one dared to go near, the bobcat they called Ranger. HAS followed every movement with cold precision. When someone passed too close, he would lash out, claws scraping the bars, a loud growl vibrating through the metal. He wasn't large compared to other wild cats, but there was something in HAS presence, something untamed, something that wouldn't come closer. Ranger hadn't always been this way. He had been born in captivity, taken from HAS mother before he even appeared HAS ace. Raised not by another bobcat, but by the sound of keys, the slam of doors, and the rattle of steel balls on concrete floors. He learned early that humans meant fear, noise, and pain. Over the years, he was passed from one facility to another, each claiming to rehabilitate him, but none understanding that a creature born without freedom cannot be tamed by confinement. The last center had given up. Now, he sat in HAS final cage, labeled aggressive. Not suitable for release. And the paper taped to the front said it all, scheduled for euthanasia, 72 hours. That was the day Sarah Bunnet walked in. She wasn't a stranger to heartbreak. For 10 years, she had volunteered at animal rescues, often being the last face a dying animal saw before being put down. But she had never gotten used to the silence that came after, the silence that asked, could I have done more? That morning, she hadn't planned to visit the center. Something, she couldn't explain what, just pulled her there. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe some leaves really do call for help in ways we can't hear. When she entered the back hallway, the sound hit her first, a snarl so deep it felt alive in her chest. She froze, heart racing, ace scanning until they found him, the bobcat, pacing, fear bristling, ace like liquid gold locked on her. Most people stepped back. Sarah stepped closer. He's there, she whispered swiftly. No answer, of course, just another growl. She read the tag on the cage and felt her throat tighten. Euthanasia, 3 days. A worker passing by noticed her staring. Careful, he said. That is trouble. Tried to attack 2 handlers last week. You've done everything we can. Sarah nodded but didn't move. Her eyes never left Rangers. Is scared, she said quietly. The man sighed. They're all scared. But some can be saved. Sarah didn't respond. She just stood there, still, calm, silent. For several minutes, the bobcat stared at her, HAS tail twitching. Then, for the first time, he stopped pacing. Their eyes met, a long, motionless moment. And in that stillness, Sarah felt something she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't pity. It was resignation. She had seen that look before, in animals who had given up. It was the look of something alive, slowly turning into something that no longer wanted to be. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of those golden eyes haunted her, the mix of rage and fear, the sound of claws on steel. She kept telling herself there was nothing she could do, the decision wasn't hers. But by sunrise, she was back at the center. When the director saw her walk in, he frowned. Sarah, please don't tell me you're here for the bobcat. I am, she said simply. Sarah, you've tried everything. Is unpredictable. You can't keep a wild animal like that. I'm not asking to keep him, she replied. I'm asking for a chance to understand him. He hesitated, clearly torn between policy and the quiet conviction in her voice. Finally, he sighed. You get 48 hours. After that, if there is no change. I understand, she said. That evening, Sarah pulled a folding chair in front of Ranger's cage and sat down. No gloves, no stick, no fear. Just her voice. He, Ranger, she said softly, as if speaking to a lost child. I know you don't trust me. You don't have to. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore. At first, he ignored her. He growled, hissed, turned away. But Sarah didn't move. She stayed for hours, speaking softly, reading root from an old book, sometimes just sitting in silence while he watched from the shadows. Night fell. The center grew quiet. And then, for just a second, Ranger Lord HAS hit, resting IT on HAS pause. IT was the smallest gesture. But Sarah knew what it meant. He wasn't giving in. He was starting to listen. By the time she left that night, the staff had gone home. She turned back once before leaving, whispering to the darkness. Hold on, Ranger. Just a little longer. You're not done yet. And behind the bars, two golden eyes followed her out of the room. Not with anger anymore, but with the faintest flicker of something no one thought he still had, hope. The next morning, Sarah was the first to arrive. The center still smelled of bleach and wet straw, the kind of sterile silence that felt more like a hospital than a home. Ranger's cage was dimly lit, a single beam of light from the small window landing on HAS fair. He was awake, alert, watching her as soon as she stepped in. He didn't snarl this time. He didn't hide either. He just watched. Sarah smiled faintly. Morning, handsome. You made it through another night. She sat down in the same chair as before, calm movements, no sudden noise. In her hands, she held a small towel, a bowl of water, and a piece of raw chicken. The staff had warned her. Don't get close. Don't feed him by hand. It turn on you the second he can. But Sarah wasn't reckless. She was listening, not to the people around her, but to the RHYTHM of the animal in front of her. Every flick of HAS tail, every breath, every twitch of HAS ear, it was all language. She placed the food just outside the bars and stepped back. Ranger didn't move for almost 5 minutes. Then, cautiously, he crept forward, sniffing the air, muscles tight like coiled rope. When HAS paw finally reached out and pulled the meat inside, Sarah smiled quietly and whispered. There you go. No tricks. Just trust. He ate fast, eyes darting between her face and the food, unsure which one was the real threat. Days passed like this, patient, deliberate. Sarah came every morning and sat in the same chair, reading softly or just watching in silence. The staff thought she was wasting her time. One of the caretakers said, "Is come now, but it's just instinct. Snap back. They always do." Sarah didn't argue. She simply said, maybe no one ever gave him enough time to stop fighting. Ranger was changing, not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, delicate ones that only someone like Sarah would notice. HAS breathing slowed when she entered. HAS tail twitched less. And sometimes, when she spoke, HAS ears would tilt forward, listening. One afternoon, as she sat beside HAS cage, rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then heavy, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. Ranger was restless, pacing in circles, claws scratching the floor. Sarah placed her hand on the bars and said softly, "It's just rain. It's okay." He froze. HAS ace locked on her hand, a few inches away, trembling slightly from her breath. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, he stepped closer. One cautious paw after another. And for the first time, he didn't growl. He simply stood there, inches away, breathing in the warmth of a human he no longer feared. Sarah's voice cracked as she whispered. "That's it. You're okay. You're saved." For a second, HAS nas brushed the cold metal where her fingers rested. It was barely a touch, but in that moment, every wall between them began to crumble. When she told the staff what happened, they didn't believe her. One handler scoffed, "You're seeing what you want to see. That animal's a ticking bomb." Sarah didn't argue. She only smiled and said, "Maybe bombs don't go off when you stop lighting fuses." But as the days turned into weeks, no one could deny the change. Ranger began eating regularly. He stopped pacing. And one morning, when Sarah entered humming softly, he let out a sound no one had ever heard from him before. A soft, rumbling purr. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. It was hesitant, uncertain, but real. Sarah sat down and whispered through tears, "You did it, Ranger. You let someone in." By the end of that week, word had spread beyond the center. Volunteers who had once been too afraid to walk past HAS cage were now standing nearby, amazed. And even the director, who had already signed the euthanasia papers, couldn't believe what he was seeing. She changed him, one of the staff murmured. Not replied, no, she didn't change him. She just reminded him he could still feel safe. That night, Sarah stayed later than usual. She sat on the floor outside HAS cage, legs crossed, reading ruled by the faint yellow light. Ranger lay only a few feet away, HAS hit resting on HAS pause, a self-lossed, listening. When she stopped reading, she whispered into the quiet. You don't know this yet, but soon you're going to feel grass under your paws again. You're going to see the sky without bars. I promise you that. He didn't move. Didn't make a sound. But the soft rise and fall of HAS breathing told her everything she needed to know. He believed her. 2 months had passed since Sarah first sat in front of Ranger's cage. The world outside the rescue center had moved on, seasons shifting, storms passing. But inside that cold building, something extraordinary had quietly begun to bloom. Ranger was no longer the snarling shadow everyone feared. He was calm now, cautious, yes, but calm. When Sarah entered, he would lift HAS head and blink slowly, that small silent gesture of trust that only animals give when they finally feel safe. But not everyone shared her hope. One morning, the change director called her into HAS office. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from too many rules and not enough heart. Sarah, he said, the Bayard's been asking about Ranger. Is been here longer than any aggressive attack you've ever hit. We don't have the resources to keep him indefinitely. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Is not aggressive anymore, she said firmly. Is healing. You've seen it. He sighed. I have. But you know how IT works, regulations, funding, risk assessments. They don't see what you see. Sarah leaned forward, voice trembling but determined. Then let me take him. I find him a sanctuary. Somewhere he can live free, safely. Just give me time. The director hesitated. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Finally, he nodded. 1 week. After that, the decision is out of my hands. That night, Sarah barely slept. Her mind raced through phone calls, emails, and disparate messages to wildlife sanctuaries across the state. Most said no. Some didn't respond at all. But she refused to give up, not after how far Ranger had come. On the 5th day, her phone finally buzzed. A calm voice on the other end said, "I read your request. You take him, if he can travel." Sarah froze. "Is ready," she whispered. "Is more than ready." The morning of the transfer arrived cold and quiet. A mist hung over the fields outside, and frost sparkled on the chain link fences like 8,000 tiny stars. Sarah stood by Ranger's cage one last time. He watched her, alert, tail flicking slowly. The transport crate sat open nearby, padded with blankets, sunlight glinting on its metal edge. Most bobcats resisted capture. But when Sarah whispered, "Come on, Ranger, it's time," he stepped forward without a sound. Every handler in the room froze. No growl. No hiss. No claws. Just trust. When the door clicked shut behind him, Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. Not of a sadness, but of something bigger. Something like peace. The drive to the sanctuary took hours. Fields gave way to forests, and forests to open plains, where the wind moved like waves. Sarah kept glancing at the crate beside her, watching the slow, steady movement of Ranger's breath. When they finally arrived there, the staff guided her to an enclosure that opened into acres of wild grass, trees, and rocky hills. The gate was wide open. All that stood between Ranger and HAS new life was a few steps of courage. Sarah knelt beside the crate and unlatched the door. "Go on," she whispered. "This is what you've been waiting for." For a moment, he didn't move. He looked back at her, a steady, golden, knowing. Then, slowly, he stepped into the sunlight. The wind hit HAS fair, and for the first time in HAS life, it didn't smell like metal or bleach. It smelled like freedom. He stretched HAS legs, muscles rippling beneath HAS coat, and then, without warning, he bolted forward. Through the grass. Past the trees. Toward everything that had once been only a dream. Sarah watched until he disappeared behind a rise in the land. Her hands trembled, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of goodbye. She felt gratitude. A few weeks later, Sarah received an email from the sanctuary. Attached was a photo, Ranger, lying under a tree, sun sinking into HAS fair, eyes closed, peaceful. The message was short. "Is thriving. Thank you for believing when no one else would." Sarah smiled through her tears. She closed her laptop, looked out the window, and whispered softly. You proved them wrong, Ranger. You really did. Sometimes, saving a life isn't about breaking chains, it's about giving something wild the space to remember what freedom feels like. And maybe that's what Sarah really did. She didn't just save a bobcat. She restored HAS Story, the one the world almost erased. They said he was too dangerous to save. But in the end, he wasn't dangerous at all. He was just waiting for someone brave enough to see the heart still beating behind the fear.